Hey folks, Steve here with another Korea Fire and Ice video. In this video, we'll be looking at, gosh, must be turn 22. We're getting later into the game. We are actually in March 1951, so there is, I guess, we still have quite a number of turns to go. If we were to make it all the way to the end of the game, it's basically 13 turns are left, though we've obviously, we're past the halfway point for sure. We are at a pretty critical uh, point of the game in that the UN player has victory sort of in sight, and it really comes into navigating the victory point system in this game and determining can they hold on against the communist surge long enough to get that victory. Now, um, something I do when playing a lot of these games, if I don't have a super strong memory of where front lines are at in a given time, I will go onto YouTube. I will punch in, the topic, the war, whatever, and depending on how long that war is, I might say like Pacific War every week of World War II, and you'll find some very kind people who've taken the effort to create a map view and showing the front lines and who controls what territories, every week or every day across the lifespan of that conflict. And I like to watch those videos as I'm playing to kind of understand, if I don't already know where the front lines are supposed to be at in a given time period, like how well am I doing as either side, right? Where are we sitting compared to history? And that can kind of tell me, am I doing poorly? Am I doing okay? Is it just a little bit different than the history, so I can just say I'm somewhere in the mix. Well, between the last video and this one, I did go look and check. And the funny thing is, like, as the communists, technically we are way behind schedule, like way, way, way behind schedule at this point. Now, in this particular game that you're watching, this playthrough, a lot of that comes down to the late Chinese intervention. It came much later than was historical. Um, had we gotten them to come in, around the right time, maybe we would be further along with the history. So it's a good thing that like the game doesn't end 4, 5, or 6 turns earlier. Like if you were to compare this game to the Korean War, by also by Compass Games, the new reprint edition of the classic Victory Point, or not Victory Point, Victory Games game. That game ends in May 1951. This game ends at the end of July. So we actually get 2 whole months, 8 turns worth of activity um, beyond that other game, right? So in some ways, I wonder is that an accounting for the fact that you could have a late Chinese intervention and it really isn't fair to, I guess, the communist player if you don't get the communist or the Chinese communists come in until now, or January 1951, which is the latest that they can appear, you shouldn't just be penalized for that and only have, a few months to make progress, right? So maybe that's the accounting here. Either way I look at it, we're kind of behind schedule. And maybe that's how you can interpret this. I sort of covered this at the end of the last video. If you're trying to figure out, well, how does this victory point system have a relationship to what's actually happening on the board? Maybe this is, maybe this is our eureka moment, right? The UN player has done so well that they've managed to get a pretty good hold of their victory point accrual turn by turn and picking off, claiming objective victory points, that they've put themselves in a really good position. And compared to history, the Chinese communists should have been down past, Seoul again almost, or at least near Seoul and fighting around there, having taken their capital, retaken their capital, Pyongyang. Well, obviously that hasn't happened here. A lot of the communist effort has just been, working their way back down south. And so you could look at that and just saying, well, the communists are way behind schedule. The UN just has to hold on a little bit longer. If they can retain control of Pyongyang, then the game ends in a victory condition just because the UN has played, very well, or their ability to push into North Korea but maintain their defensive lines and hold the communists back allows them to be the victor. And as we circle around the objective marker system and my issues with it that I think can be resolved, I think the reality is, if we massaged the victory point system in a way that I think it should be, to make the game make a little more sense and provide incentives that make a little more sense to a player, it would probably mean I wouldn't have been exploiting Seoul for victory points. Those victory points would probably be gained in other places, but it would be harder to get those victory points. It would have been more difficult to across the board get all these victory points in a single place. We were able to be very efficient with our victory point actions at the end of each turn. That has allowed us to pick up so many points. So I think if we were playing with some of my suggested changes, the UN victory point would actually probably be a lot closer to 15 or lower rather than 19, maybe even as low as like 8 or 9 or something, where yes, the UN player has probably gained some victory points, but they haven't they're not touching up on automatic victory. Based on how well they've played here, that is my guess, is how that would shake out. It would just be less easy to bank objectives and claim objectives with almost no danger in doing so, right? That's kind of the trick that I've used. It's just I've made it irrelevant to the front line how I'm getting those victory points from Seoul, and I think that has just really changed what I think the victory situation really ought to be, which probably again should still be UN sided, maybe not overwhelmingly so, and there's still plenty of game time left for the communist player to actually get a bunch of victory points a little bit more legitimately, and I'll add, because of the way Pyongyang is set up as a single hex place that you really need to capture as the UN, you really need to recapture as the communists anyway, where they could pull those victory points kind of back into the red, and then that puts the onus back on the UN player to try to get some victory points back as well. And it just leads to the end of the game being a lot tighter than it is right now, where it feels like a certain number of actions have to happen in this turn or the game is lost, basically. That's kind of what it feels like at the moment. Like that's where we're sitting with the game. So what are we doing here now? Well, we're out of the winter turns. So the winter turns are over. We are back to the regular turns. I did roll for weather for March 1951. This is another turn, or another month, by the way, that is one turn. So this will be a very quick action this month of March before we move into April. I rolled weather. It was a 10% chance of being rainy. It wasn't rainy, so it is clear skies. So whereas last turn it was winter and snowy, which meant no planes were flying, the skies are clear, and we will see the air war that could have been because of the Soviet entry, because of the preponderance of air capability for the communist side right now, which is ahistorical because of the ahistorical intervention that has occurred in the game. We're going to see a potentially pretty big air battle coming up here soon. Now, what's weird about that is that the UN player is going to do some oddball things because of the way the victory point system works. So I've done all the reinforcements for this monthly turn. There was no other foreign intervention actions. The communist player didn't want to ask for foreign aid because that would just that would certify the UN victory by giving them a victory point. The infrastructure and supply phase, the communists repaired a Chinese airfield, so they're topped off. They are figuring they're going to use those airfields. And the UN player had to spend a fair amount of supply reflipping HQs and basically getting rid of a out of ammo marker on a unit, just trying to get things set up so that they can at least operate this next turn. And that brings us to the aircraft recovery. There really wasn't much to talk about there for the communists. The UN has repaired all their available planes, so they're good to go. When it came in time for the aircraft reinforcement, what was funny was that you had, for the UN player, you had a carrier group air unit leave and a different one come in. One was withdrawn, one was added, and I forgot to look to see if their combat abilities are actually different or not. Just one of those funny things, but historical detail, right? You would swap them out. There you go. Maybe it's better. I'm not sure. I can look at that later. But anyway, so we are actually at the Air Force's commitment phase. So the rest of the monthly turn is going to come down to, okay, what's everybody doing for air? And this is kind of really important because, again, the amount of air capability on the side of the communist player is very high. There's a couple of special rules that come into play. Because the Soviets have intervened, each Chinese airfield can base 4 planes, not 2, as you know, an improved airfield can field 4. So basically, we're going to have the capability. I might have to double check this. It might even be all communist airfields can field 4, but basically the huge amount of Soviet planes we can actually field them because we have a much expanded airfield capability. For the UN player, I mean, they still have all the air that they've had, but now, if you count counter to counter, there's certainly something close to parity, and it might even be the communists have more planes in this sort of regional view of the war. But the UN still has a major advantage when it comes to the air commitment phase, and that is that the communist player has to commit their planes first. That means they have to assign all the planes that they're going to assign before the UN player does. Now, that's an advantage to the UN player because it basically means they can decide what to do. So let's say the communist player says, hey, I really want to own the strategic mission space. I'm going to assign a bunch of fighters to Mig Alley. I'm going to assign a bunch of stuff to infrastructure strikes and airfield strikes and all that good stuff. The UN player can respond to that and can say, okay, well then I don't need to split my forces. I can throw all of my air forces into the strategic realm rather than the tactical realm. Or, and this is what the UN player is thinking right now, if the communist player decides to put a bunch of forces in Mig Alley, the UN player can simply say, okay, I'm not going to put anything into Mig Alley. Maybe I'm not going to assign anything to strategic missions at all and focus entirely on the tactical level. And so the communist player knows that they can do that. So that puts the communist player in a weird situation, right? Like, what each other can do. So what does the communist player try to do, right? That's the important thing. What can they try to do? And the reason why the UN player might totally abandon the strategic theater here is that they don't want to lose victory points in a Mig Alley fight. Let's say the odd band, low bell curve possibility that the communists manage to win, air combat in Mig Alley. Well, that means the UN player loses a victory point, which puts their ability to win the game via an automatic victory potentially out of reach. Just losing one victory point can do that in this game situation right now. And I don't think the UN player wants to do that. They will do whatever it takes to not lose a victory point and ensure that they can get their last couple of victory points needed to win the game. That's what they want to do. Absolutely what they need to do, what they want to try to do. So, what to do here? I think I'm trying to figure out how to consider this, right? I think so much of this is leaning on like who wants to do what and how. Sorry, I had to make an adjustment that I forgot about, but I had intended to do last video. I had to move a unit down to nearby Seoul for a particular reason. No worries, just fixing a mistake. Okay, so yeah, so here's the thing, right? If I'm the communist player, say, hey, I'd love to win a fight in Mig Alley, so I don't put anything in Mig Alley, right? Because I figure the UN player is going to avoid putting stuff in Mig Alley. But of course, by the act of the communist player not putting stuff in Mig Alley, the UN player will then put stuff in Mig Alley, right? That's the inherent advantage of the UN player. Whatever the communist does with their air, even if they have some kind of potential superiority, any which way that the communists act, the UN player can respond and make it fit what they want to do, right? So that makes the problem for the communists twofold. They can focus on an area like the tactical missions. If they do that, then the UN player will still get to do their strategic missions, right? If the communist player tries to send everything into one deployment scope, the UN player can then make use of sending a marginal number into the strategic missions and win out there. By comparison, or sort of the other thing that really sucks about that is if the communist player splits and does some stuff strategic, some stuff tactical, then the UN player can simply, pick one to lose that they feel like they can lose, like strategic, like avoiding a Mig Alley loss, and focus on the tactical where they'll probably win out in the tactical. So it's almost any way you look at it, the UN player will dominate whichever, will likely dominate whichever deployment scope they want to, as long as they're willing to give up something like, they lost an airfield or two or something like that. So this is tough. Like this is actually a difficult decision on how this air war is going to occur, and depending on the casualties, this is the Soviets' only swing, right? If they go up and a lot of their stuff gets shot down, they're going to have a really hard time repairing damaged aircraft, where the UN will continue to have a pretty good chance of repairing theirs. And then, by the time the rest of this will even matter, the game will be over. Because as soon as the Soviets stop having near parity or superiority, there's almost no point in sending planes up to begin with, other than maybe some last ditch efforts. So this is really it. Like I think this month is the Soviet air attempt to bloody the UN enough that the air war can even continue. So I'm going to take myself off camera. I'm going to bring the air displays closer together so we can figure out just how this whole air war is going to break out. Okay, so here is everything after the air commitment phase. So the communists did the very best thing that they could do, realizing that it does seem indeed that they potentially have some local superiority when it comes to planes. And so what they decided to do, they couldn't field everything there, even with the bonus of the Soviet airbasing capability enhancement. They still could only send out, all these guys here. They had to leave some stuff behind, but these are mostly LA-11 planes and Yak 9P planes, stuff like that, and some of the MiG-9s. But we fielded everything else, and we did sort of force the UN player to have to decide. Again, I'm playing myself, so how can I can't outsmart myself, right? I can only try to apply logical thinking on both sides' part to say, here's what makes sense if I know what the other player might be thinking, and I do because I'm me. So here we go. So the Korean player, the North Korean player, communist player said, okay, I bet the UN player does not want to have a fight in Mig Alley. And to ensure the case, I'm going to allocate some of my planes to Mig Alley just to make sure, just to bait him, right? Come out and play. We got our best fighter planes, and it's just low enough a number uh, to make it maybe tantalizing. Like, hey, come have a fight. Let's see what happens. And to throw some additional, cherries on top, they allocated all of their big bomber planes to infrastructure bombing of the South. So we have four Tu-2. I'm not sure how that's really referred to. Tu-2. Four of those air units assigned to infrastructure striking. We didn't bother with airfield striking. What I'm hoping is to hurt the infrastructure so that the Allies, the UN, has less supply capability to continue activating units and respond to any breakthroughs that we want to have. So that's the thinking there. They also assigned all their other MiG-9 planes to top cover. You can see a big old pile here because that's what they're good at, is air-to-air. So there's really only one place for those guys to go that isn't Mig Alley. So they do have, was it 7 planes allocated to that. Now MiG-9s are okay. They have a 3 air-to-air rating, so they're not the best planes on the board, but they'll do just fine for our purposes. And then 4 IL-10 planes were set to ground support. They're each valued 4, so that's essentially 16 air support, which is, I'm sorry, 12, no, that is 16. 4 times 4 is 16. 16 air support, which the communists, up to this point, could never have imagined fielding something like that. Only through Soviet intervention is this even feasible. So this is obviously, again, ahistorical. It's nice that the game allows for this, just like OCS has the optional rule where you can have a big old air battle. The only difference being this isn't an optional thing. It's just something that could happen under the right circumstances, and of course in this game it is happening. You would not get this in, say, the Korean War, Victory Games reprint from Compass, because that game has no communist air units. The communist player is given a few close air support points to divvy up in the first few turns, and then it's just assumed the UN player has air superiority the rest of the game. It is nice that this game allows for some more exciting things to happen, given the nice air system that exists here and the different options that are available. It is nice that it is an more interactive, thing that can be a little more interesting than just the UN running roughshod the entire time. Again, pending the ahistorical low probability chance of the Soviets intervening. And I'll point out, as we're looking at this, if I were playing with my objective marker rule changes that I'm going to suggest, we probably would not have seen Soviet intervention at all, because the UN player would not have had victory points up past 15 where Soviet intervention is even feasible. In fact, I would bet with the changes that I'm recommending, it would be very unlikely for either side to have victory points that close to automatic victory, which is how I think the game is probably meant to be played, where this situation is very unlikely. So, the fact that it's happening here in my game right now, do not mistake this for something that maybe should happen a lot in your games. Me exploiting the victory point system has probably allowed this weird situation to occur, and the game supports it because the counters are there. But under maybe more sane constraints, it would be rarer for this whole situation to even happen. So consider this whole scenario that you're watching highly unlikely. I'd say unlikely in the base game, and then probably very unlikely if you were using my variant rules that I'm refining. So that's the situation for the strategic side, and for the communists. So when it was back over to the UN player, they had to kind of think through what are my options, right? We have fewer planes, but they can be pretty good, right? So their thinking was, yeah, we don't want to fight in Mig Alley. We don't want to do that. So they elected not to contest Mig Alley. They don't want to give up a victory point. And that victory point is only given to somebody who actually wins air-to-air combat. If there's no air-to-air combat, then there you go. this might be one of those weird things with the game. You say, well, the UN would not do that, right? They would contest Mig Alley. They would send planes to go fight that fight. There's no reason why, what reasons can you think of to not do that? And if it's just to save face, I don't know if I buy that explanation, right? The whole point is like you get a victory point because it's in the headlines, Mig Alley Fight, plane versus plane. That sort of public image thing is part of the victory points. Um, I could see a case where maybe you would want someone to lose victory points if they don't contest it, right? But that's not what the rule says. So the UN player wanting to avoid losing any victory points at this point because they're on the cusp of victory are choosing not to contest it. Likewise, they're not sending any of their strategic bombers out because the MiG 15s would have free reign on getting free shots at shooting them down, and we don't want to do that. We're going to wait, and we're just going to keep our planes off to the side and not worry about it for now. And if we need to reuse them, we'll do that. When I do my basing, sometimes I bring the planes down and I find them on the chart and figure out how good they are at each thing before I do the whole air basing count, because I think this is one spot of the game where they could have just put counter or put factors on counters. This is the situation where it makes the most sense. I don't like having to look. I'm starting to get more annoyed over time having to look at this chart and go like, oh, okay, this is an F-48, so that's a 3. Just put 3 somewhere on the counter. We can make that work. So what they did do is with what other limited capability they have, they put 3 planes in top cover, a massive numerical inferiority, which is a bummer, but that's the best they could do with the planes that they had. And then everything else that they have are really not intended for air to air. They're just tactical. So we do have a fair number of planes here that are doing ground support. So that's 6 planes. And then I think if I count up all their factors, it's like 4, 8, and then 12. So 20 air support, which is pretty great, right? Now the only thing about this will be that there's going to be some top cover fights, and then after that, depending on who's still around, then it'll be about intercepting individual air support missions. So it's going to slow down my combat resolution because I'm going to have to see whether or not these air units fight and what happens with that. And when you're doing that on an individual fight basis, that can be what makes the combat rounds go, take much longer to play through. And why I do it off camera, because it's just, you got to go, okay, I'm going to roll. Does he make it? Does he stay on station? Oh, do I make it? Does he intercept? Do they fight? What happens? And now that there's actually air forces to combat each other, it is a little more complicated for that. So there you go. That is the decision play space that we had to go. The communist player had enough forces that they could spare operating separately, and now we have the situation that you see. Now the next thing that's going to occur here would be the Mig Alley Fight. There is no Mig Alley Fight, so these guys are going to go back to available, which the box is too small for all these planes, so I'm just going to set them over here. And then we have our four planes, and I believe I'm just going to be wanting to roll a 3 or less. I'm going to grab my rules real quick to make sure. I think if I roll a 1, then you can take off even more here, which I think the communist player would love to do that. Yeah. Okay, so we'll roll for the first one. That is a hit, so Allied infrastructure is reduced by 1. The second one also hit, so that's another infrastructure loss. The next one also an infrastructure loss, and then the last one, which is a failure, but I think this is just going to, yeah, it's just a miss. So all these guys are going to go back And I'm just going to put them down here just to clean things up a little bit. Um, so yeah, that was pretty good. They knocked Allied infrastructure down quite a bit, which will be important for the long scheme of things. Again, I'm sure there's somebody watching this just losing their mind over this event happening in this war game. Remember, ahistorical circumstances are happening right now. We are off the beaten path. The game allows for it. It's unlikely, but that's where we're at. So Soviet Chinese bombers have bombed infrastructure in South Korea, um, for use by the UN, or UN held territory, I guess, however which way you want to look at it. Um, so that's over, and so now we look at, are there any other strategic missions? No. And then we are going to determine who controls the skies over Korea, if anyone, with the top cover phase. And oh, actually, gosh, this is significant. I forgot something. Yeah, I have forgotten quite a bit. I forgot a few things. Gosh, I feel so bad. The majority of these guys are flying long range from uh, from China. So these guys are all flying long range, which means they're not as good as they would otherwise be. And I had basically these two planes flying from the local North Korea airfield. The other thing is that the MiGs that were in Mig Alley, because the opponent didn't allocate any, uh, they actually get to come down here into top cover. So this is, again, I think the decision space is probably the same. The UN player would not want to contest Mig Alley and lose a victory point. But what this does do, advantage for the communist, is that their planes are going to come down, and it is going to be, oof. I mean, maybe the UN player shouldn't have fielded any air. It's maybe what should have happened here. Um, I don't know. So okay, we're going to look at resolving the top cover, but this is pretty gnarly. This is pretty gnarly in general for the UN player. Uh, Yikes, 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 yikes. Okay, so what we're going to do is the highest aircraft abilities go first. So just so we're clear on where that is, the F-80s and F-84s are 3 rating. So each of these guys is a 3 rated plane. The MiG-15s flying from the long range box are also 3s. And then all of the MiG-9s flying from the long range box are 2, and these guys are also 3. So right now it's basically a whole bunch of 3s and a few 2s fighting, which isn't isn't so good for the UN player, I think. Just the way it all shakes out. Maybe next time the communist player might be flying from, flying MiG 15s from the local air box just for that superiority. So the UN player fires first. There's going to be alternating. So the first plane here is going to roll. They need to roll a 3 or less. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to roll. Is it a D10? It is a D10. So the first UN plane misses. So then we have our first MiG-15. That is a 3. And that is a miss. We have the next UN plane. That is a miss. The next Soviet plane is also a miss. And then the final UN plane in top cover also misses. So a bunch of whiffs for the UN player. We still have, obviously, now the rest of the Soviet planes to go. That's a miss. And then, oh, that's a hit. So there is a loss there. Yep, okay. And then miss. And a miss. And then we're going to have 5 rolls at 2. No. No. That's a hit. That's a hit. And that's it. We don't need to roll anymore. Woof. Well, that's not good for the UN player, that's for sure. And we don't... let's see. Okay, and then we would roll on station. So all these guys don't necessarily get to stay in the top cover box to intercept. They have to pass their on station check, which the communists are not as good at doing this. So this is on the D6, a 2 or less. So I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't even do this on camera because this sucks for you guys to just watch. So he goes back to available. He gets to stay. He does not. Does not. Does not. Does not. Gets to stay. Gets to stay. Fails. Goes home, and then fails and goes home. Okay, so so now that we've recorded so much of this air war, what happened? Well, you had a lot of UN planes get shot down. That's a problem, and that is exactly what the UN wanted, or the communist player wanted. The UN player didn't hit anything, but the vast majority of the fighters of the communist forces went back home. They didn't stay around long enough to do interceptions. It does mean that going into the turn itself, there will be a pretty good chance that the UN player is going to have stuff get intercepted. If we do the count up again of the planes, we have the air support going off the chart up to 19. I think that's the maximum it can go, as far as I know. If I do the count again, 8 and 12, so we have 20. And then these guys, because they are in the long range box, their abilities were actually 3, so the air ability for the communists this turn is maximum of 12 this time. As it stands right now, the communists' support versus the UN support, are probably close to even. So just to talk to that, the UN player has 19 air support. They have 5 artillery support. They lost quite a bit over time due to routes and disrupts and stuff. So that's 24 plus 11 tank is what, 35 total support. Compared to the communists that have what, 18 plus 12, so 30. So by the numbers, the UN player has greater support levels, but their ability to actually get their air in will be possibly reduced by the communist top cover. So as we go into this next turn, these critical turns, the UN player and the communist player have near support parity based on support tracks. Now, it doesn't mean that all that support will be able to be used all the time, depending on what actions are being taken. But that is where things are sitting for that right now. So there you go, guys. I may keep the air displays next to one another over here now, because we're sort of covering up the southeast part of South Korea. I don't know that we'll end up using these parts of the map for a while, so these guys can sit tight here. But okay, that's it for the monthly turn. Gosh, a lot. I just have been talking for 23 minutes about this air war. We're going to call this video the air war that never was, or something like that. Whatever the OCS Korea optional rule is, that's what we're going to call it. I'll look at that before I upload it. Okay, so there you go, guys. The communists have shown the UN forces what's what in the skies, for better or for worse, and that will impact what happens next as the game rolls on. Let me do a cut here and bring us back over to the land war. Okay, as we gear up to begin this turn, I did go through the reinforcement phase. The Chinese communists have, let me make sure I get this count right, 10 units joining. Split them up 5 and 5 at supply sources. I mean, we're getting to the point we're going to have more Chinese communist units on this front line than, I mean, the communists are going to have no problem having a coherent front line pushing all the way down to Seoul, just because of the number of units that they're going to be able to field here. So the issue is not, are there enough men? It's, are they penetrating the lines enough to get through? One other thing I'll mention, the reason why neither side focused on interdiction this month, I should have mentioned this earlier, the communist has enough HQs now that it doesn't matter if one gets interdicted and they can't refresh, because they have so many additional ones. They have more than what's needed. So the UN player saw it as a waste to try to stop that. And then likewise, for the communist player, they want more support than interdiction, because it doesn't really matter, how many units the HQs activate on the UN side and who gets refreshed, because they have so few units anyway that interdiction doesn't matter as much. What they want to be able to do is focus that air not on interdiction, but ground support, to increase the likelihood that UN units are going to get smashed and trashed and destroyed so they can take Pyongyang. So all of that's well calculated. The UN player has done what they can to replenish units. They are rebuilding 5 units, 1 Republic of Korea unit, 4 US units. They are trying to do what they can to create their rebuilds oriented around the cadre structure. So there are some, cadre divisions now that are going to be without their command cadre, and are in the destroyed pile. There's not much we can do about that, but the 5th Marine Division will be sort of back on the board in strength, and another unit to support the Cav. I think it's the 1st Cav Division, one of the regiments for that are in. So I might be getting the unit designations, corps versus division or something wrong. I can't remember now. You can tell I'm a little bit tired as I'm recording this. So yeah, so they are bringing more units onto the board. We still have some more that are trying to work their way up. I had to keep a guy back here. I had intended to do that because the UN player needs to keep 1 unit within 3 hexes of those spots of victory points, because the communist player could claim them if there are not units nearby. So just one of those weird situations where you don't need your own units near revealed objective markers to claim them. You just need your opponent units away from it. So it's sort of this weird thing, like the communist player could actually pick up 4 victory points, pulling the UN player away from automatic victory potential if the UN left Seoul unoccupied. So that's sort of an interesting thing. I could be getting rid of those objective markers by having my units be there, but that would take away our ability to get victory points because you only get one objective action. So I don't know, more of that sort of like it makes sense sort of victory point objective system, but there's still oddities to it. So I had to keep one unit behind for that purpose. And what will happen is this South Korean unit will take its place, and then this unit belongs to this cadre. The rest of these guys are going to move up together. So yeah, it's sort of weird, trying to figure out how to make all this work. UN communications phase is all clear. UN refresh phase, all clear there. But it really is basically down to the communist player to take action and do stuff here. And they will obviously do that. There's not a whole lot for the communist player to do in terms of strategic movement, because basically everyone's kind of as far up as they can reasonably get as it stands. But yeah, so this is really just going to come down to activations and what the line looks like after this activation. So I know this video will probably be long already. We're probably just going to do this one turn for this video. But I'm going to take a cut here, and I'm going to go take care of the action. Obviously, I think the big thing here is going to take me a while. This is going to be a longer turn just because we're going to have so many combats along this front line. And on top of that, we are going to have the potential for interception of air support and all of that. And that takes some time. So basically, if the UN player decides, hey, I'm going to try to use air, and here are my units that I'm going to do it with, that is when the communist player will get their opportunity to attempt to intercept and shoot down those planes, denying the UN player that support for that given combat and sending that unit to the damaged aircraft box. And then those intercepting planes will likely not stay on station because, again, the communist air units just can't stay on station to save their life, really. So we'll see how that goes. When we come back, the board might look very, very different. The main thing, just so you know, before I would explain this if I were recording every action I was taking. Everything I'm going to be doing is going to try to be to reinforce how do I take Pyongyang? How will that occur? How am I going to be able to take that action? And that is really going to mean a lot of these strategic moves are going to be to put units up here so they can activate, attack, clear it, and then some of these units that are just behind the front line can activate for movement and potentially go, 1, 2, 3, 4 movement points into Pyongyang and take it. If we fail to do that, then it's almost guaranteed to be a game over situation. Very likely, anyway. So we'll see how it goes, guys. I just wanted to chime in with a quick show of just what rough shape the communists are still in if you think they were just going to blow through the UN. I had a combat, the first of several combats I've declared. This is still just the first activation of the UN or the communist activation phase. So there's plenty more to do, but just right off the bat, it was like, okay, we'll get up here, we'll do some deliberate attacks. Maybe we'll draw off some of the UN support and weaken it so that we can break the line down here easier later. Well, what ended up happening was I got through all the support levels, and I was thinking, okay, I think it's going to be pretty close to even, and then I totally forgot about the naval bombardment, which this hex, which was the target hex, is in range for, and that made it a blowout in favor of the UN. Just, the air support was not intercepted. The communists didn't want to use their air at all because they want to save it for the Pyongyang push, because there's a very good chance any air support we provide, even if it does, wouldn't be intercepted, but they might not be able to stay on station. So we don't want to use it until we're sure we want to use it. And that gave the UN a slight advantage to say, okay, well, my planes have a better chance of staying on station. We're going to send in 2 planes worth 8 support levels, and the bombardment, naval bombardment, which just made it. I kind of forgot about it, but it still could have shaped out in the communist favor if the air was shot down, but that didn't happen. We did lose some of our we lost one intercepting communist plane because it failed its stay on station roll, so it went back home. So overall, this is a bad attack, and the communists had a 5 loss that they had to take. So they chose to eliminate 1 unit. They did have a supporting unit, so we didn't want to just eliminate everything. So we lost a unit, we took a replacement loss, and then we retreated 3 hexes. And a unit became routed with a no ammo marker. So our whole, we were going to try to cut through this way. That has failed, and now we're going to do the rest of these combats. Now, it won't be as bad because the UN player won't have naval bombardment there, but that's something we need to keep in mind over here, where the naval bombardment could affect things over here. Though I'll say we had kept the 7th Fleet in the Sea of Japan, so I guess that's maybe something the UN player should have changed. They should have brought him over here, but I forgot. So, or I thought I didn't need it, but I don't know. So there you go. I'm going to keep going here. We'll come back if there's anything else major to report, or until we get to the end. Here we are after everything is said and done, including UN activations for all that they were worth. We did not take Pyongyang. That doesn't mean that the game is over. There is one possibility left. I do not know that it's feasible mathematically, but we'll probably play it through one more turn in another video. I'll save it for the next video. It might be a really short video next video because I gotta stop gaming here. But you can see I've broken through the Allied line in several places. While we had disastrous combats, what we were doing is wearing down the UN air, and eventually, after enough combats, striking here over and over again, the UN air eventually could not stay on station. We had enough supply to keep activating units, and in fact, we had so many units we could keep attacking, and I would even allow communist units to be eliminated to clear the way for new units to be activated and move forward. But then partway through doing that, I realized something that hadn't really been relevant until now, which is you only check stacking at the end of an activation, which means I could, and I ended up doing it, which is how we got these breakthroughs, using stacks of units, big stacks of units, to do human wave attacks. That's essentially what the mechanic is representing, are just the wave attacks that the communists used. Sort of historically, that's how the game adjudicates it, where you can pile in a bunch of units into one hex and have a combat. And the thing is, you could keep piling up units, and there's really almost no limit, right? So if you have a huge amount of units all in one hex and attacking, or in multiple hexes, if you have 8 units attacking, that's 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8. Very quickly, you get upwards of plus 30 to your attack. And once you've worn out the UN air, and we've actually brought down UN support in a number of places where the UN's almost out of artillery, you're almost guaranteed to just win the combat. And then it comes down to, well, if it's an elite unit, that elite unit could potentially retreat, because the elite unit can reduce the loss factor from 5 to 4. You can bleed off a replacement point, and if you can retreat 3 hexes, right? So it's really important. An elite unit is super powerful in just keeping a line in existence. But either way, if you did that big attack, okay, plus 30, whatever, you win. If as long as you can advance after combat, then all of those units can potentially advance after combat. So if it's like 4, then they get 4 movement points. You can move out if you, depending on how big of a hole you've broken, you could send people sailing down these roads. The problem was that in some cases they had nowhere to go, um, and I had a real hard time separating the units. And when you check the stacking, I actually lost like 2 or 3 Chinese units because there was nowhere for them to advance to, and I couldn't not advance them or else they'd still be destroyed. So I ran into some weird situations where, and it's actually not that weird. It's just representing the human wave. Like you get all these bonuses, but it's because you're just throwing bodies into the meat grinder. We lost a number of units, and in fact, across the whole action, we lost many Chinese units. So the huge amount of units we had, we turned out to really need them to wear out the UN and to break through. And that's really, I think, the main advantage that the communist player has in the late game here, where they may not have a whole lot of tank or artillery support, they may not have air support, but gosh, those human wave attacks can be very powerful if done in the right places, and we've seen that, right? We've created a huge pocket over here. We're breaking through past here. I mean, it's pretty crazy. Now we've lost a lot of units to do that, but we've put ourselves in a very good position. But the UN player is still maintaining a line in front of Pyongyang, and we couldn't take it. That's basically what we just couldn't do. We just didn't have enough movement points to get around these units. Let's see, 1, 2, 4, 5. Yeah, I mean, we couldn't get around some of these spots to get on the road to get into Pyongyang so that we could reveal an objective marker. So that kind of puts us in a place where at the end of the turn, the UN player pulled off a victory point. They are sitting at 20 victory points. All that is needed is one more turn. If the UN player can get a single victory point, they win the game at the end of the next turn. At this point, the communist player has one way to stop that from happening, and I do not know mathematically if they're going to be able to do it. I suspect that they can't. Honestly, I really suspect that they can't do it. It is going to require to further break the UN line, and they need to get within 3 hexes of this objective marker to keep it from being claimed. And they can't allow the UN player to get any other victory point whatsoever. They have to get all the way down here. The closest hex, if I try to create some sort of boundary of, let's figure out where we need to go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Just using these markers as kind of a. That's the line. That's what we need to get to, right here. We can do that. That could stop the game from ending as the communists. As I look at the game situation and figure out, well, is there any, how do I get down there, right? How do I get down there? Now enemy units within 3 hexes. So what would we need to do? Let's just say we come down here and we're able to attack and eliminate. Let's just say we somehow eliminate this unit. Then we would need this unit. Maybe we did this guy move down, this guy moved over here to cover the supply line. And then if this guy was totally removed, the closest unit that could make that run would be this guy. could he make it in one move if this unit was destroyed? And by destroyed, I mean like totally destroyed and removed. That's what it would take. It would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then if he had extra movement, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. Even with reserve movement, I do not think I can get anybody down here. The other option would be if we had somebody in the strategic movement phase move to, let's just grab this guy and say we moved him to here. Is that any closer? Does that make a difference? If we blow open a hole here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Not close enough. Not close enough. And remember, a unit can only move 5 movement points, even using road and rail, and he can get reserve movement if he doesn't come into close contact with an enemy. He can move 3 more movement points. Now, even if we attacked and we advanced after combat, the most we could ever advance is like 4 movement points. So if we attacked this guy, eliminated him, we advanced for 1, 2, 3, 4. That won't be close enough either. I think this is the end of the game. I think this is game end. I don't think there's any way I can get down here. It is too late. Anything we would do next objective turn would have to be to reveal a marker, even if we were sitting on top of them right now, and that would not be enough. The UN player at this point would do nothing. Whatever combat losses would be taken would be on units. I can tell you, next turn would be spent entirely doing nothing but letting units die, because all we have to do is wait to the end of the turn, and that's it, truly. If I look even over here, try to do the same thing, somehow we illuminate all these units. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Not close enough. We just can't get close enough. And at the end of next turn, UN player pulls this off. They have 21 victory points at the end of the turn. That's game end. UN player wins. So the game is over. I'm going to declare it here. I'm going to call it. There is no point in playing any further. The communist player can't make it up. Here's the thing. I do think that if I tried harder to not just put objective points in Pyongyang, that might have made a difference if I had put them in these smaller towns where the UN player was. The problem is, even if I had done that, I'd have to spend actions revealing those markers. If I look at the rules and how this works, reveal all friendly objective markers that are adjacent to at least one friendly unit. So I guess it is possible I could have placed some around here and revealed them and maybe got a few victory points. That maybe would keep the UN player from victory. It's entirely possible. The only problem is the UN player would continue to do what they've been doing, which is staving off, they'd be placing their own objective markers still in revealing those and getting more victory points. So had I maybe played the objectives a little bit differently, maybe the communists would still be in the game. Maybe, right? There's a couple of towns that we've cleared along the way, right? We have units adjacent to them. We could have revealed them. But the game would still be pretty tight. and they would be high. The UN player would be high enough in victory points that the communists could never ask for aid. They could maybe keep going. So once again, I think where I'm at with this is just keep coming back to it. If I had simply been playing with my rules that I want to advise as an optional thing or a variant or whatever to try to fix this, I think the game would be much more in the communist favor. I think they'd be sitting pretty happy with the present situation where they're knocking down the door and they're outpacing the UN's ability to replace stuff. If you look at the future replacement phases, once we get past March, the communists get some more air, the UN gets more replacements. In May, there's a little bit of air replacement stuff going on. But the UN doesn't get any more units, really, right? So as we keep playing through, as the battles keep going, the UN force pool is just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. I could see where ideally the communists would probably win this game. I think it is entirely feasible that they would win this game if we were playing where the objective markers couldn't be squirreled away in Seoul like they have been. And maybe if I had tried harder to not simply pile up points in Pyongyang and I tried to spread them out a little bit, maybe that would have worked a little bit better and I could have avoided this endgame situation. There's a lot I want to say that has to be saved for the post-mortem video because I think I'm done here. I think this is the end of this playthrough. Certainly, I could look at other things to set up here and play, but I think I've reached the end point for this, and I got to call it with the game over. There's no way for me to sort of backtrack and try to figure out a way to readjust the game to keep it going. It's just kind of too late for that. So I think that's what we're going to have to go with. And it's frustrating because I feel like we're so close to having all of this come together in a way that really makes the game work. And I think I keep zeroing in on the Achilles heel here that is mendable and could make the game operate a little more in line with maybe how folks think the game should work. Okay, guys. Well, thanks for watching. I need to think through what's going to happen next. Are we going to do a post-mortem video? Am I going to talk about my proposed rule changes? I need to kind of think through all that stuff. And it's getting way late for me. I gotta stop recording. I got other stuff to do. I'm late for stuff. So thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. We'll see you in the next one. Take care. Keep on gaming.